welcome to another Snap Reports class and thank you for joining me today. My name is Celia Alves and in this channel I teach you ways of automating your work in Excel. Automating your tasks can bring you many benefits. Of course, saving time is probably the first one and the most important, or the one that comes to mind immediately, but with that newly available time, many more advantages may come. There are other advantages as well, like preventing errors and other things that we can discuss another time. Some tasks are not even difficult or take much time, but because you need to repeat them recurrently, they just become annoying. And it's very important to solve those annoyances so that you can carry out through your day much happier, isn't it? In today's class, we will see how we can disconnect a Power Query table from the data source. And some of you may be thinking, why would we want to do that? Power Query is all about connecting Excel to the data sources and then keep that connection so that we can refresh our data whenever we want or need it. But there are some scenarios where we may want to do that, to disconnect. After we load our data into our Excel file, we may be interested in cutting that connection between that table and the data source. We will see some scenarios where we would be interested in doing that and some ways of doing it, and then how to automate those actions. In this exercise today, we will be using some VBA code for the automation. That code will be available in my Telegram channel. Feel free to join, it's free, and I use that platform to share my files and also some announcements about news related to Excel or my activities Excel related as well. Thank you for your feedback in advance. This class is for you, so feel free to leave your feedback and your questions. And I have another request for you. As soon as you learn something new today that you think will be useful for you, just give this video a thumbs up and hit subscribe if you haven't done so yet. Okay, so let's look into our topic today. So today's video is about answering this question from Vivek Rain. He says, hi ma'am, I want to know how to save Power Query final result file with Unlink query connection. I have the answer. First need to select the table, then go to data and click Unlink button. But can I automate this step without click Unlink button? Please guide. First of all, thank you very much to Vivek Rain for sending this question. I was not aware of the Unlink option to disconnect a Power Query table from the data source, so I just learned something new with Vivek. And as we will see, this task is not really difficult to do. It's just one of those annoyances we were talking about before, because Vivek needs to do this every day. Okay, so let's see one example. In this case, I have this file with one query only. So if you go to Data and Queries and Connections, we have this one query that connects to an external CSV file and then transforms the data and brings it into this layout we see in the table. So the data source or the data itself, it's not important for today's exercise. You can apply this to any file where you have a query already built in. So Vivek also explained me that every day he runs this query and then he wants to save the data the way it shows today on a separate file for other people to use. And he wants to be sure that no one will hit refresh all and by accident changes the data that is available in that file. So it's like capturing a picture of today's data on a separate file and have it there in a static form. So the way that Vivek is doing it is coming to the table, right click, and then we come to table again here, and then down Unlink from data source. And watch what happens to our query there on the right pane. This will permanently remove the query definition from the sheet. Continue. Okay. And then it shows connection only. So the query did not disappear. If we click here, we can see all the steps still available. Also, the path to the source is available here. So if the user has access to the data source files, this would not be a good way to prevent the users from having access to the original data, where possibly some private information may exist. So for that, we will see other ways of solving this problem. If we try to refresh the data, right-click button and refresh, we see that that option is not available. Also, since the query is already here, we can do load to and then choose a table, another destination, for example here, another cell. Of course, we cannot load on top of the table. It will say it cannot do it there. And this way we load the data again. It's interesting because I can think of some scenarios where this could be useful. Loading the same table over and over again, repeatedly in different times, and have a comparison of the different scenarios. Please note that unlinking the table from the data source is not the same thing as changing the loading destination to connection only, because if we do that, so only create connection, it will say this query is currently connected to a table in your workbook. Loading the query as a connection only will delete the table. Do you want to continue? So if I say yes, now we see that the table disappeared. So changing the loading destination to connection only is not the same thing as unlinking the table from the data source. Okay, so now let's answer Vivek's question. For that, I will close this file without saving so that we can go back to the file as it was before we unlinked the table from the data source. Okay, so here we are again. This will be my strategy. I will create a macro with VBA to help Vivek automating the steps that he needs to repeat every day. For that to happen, the first thing we'll do will be saving this file as an Excel SM file format. Let's go to File, Save As. I will call this file VBA Unlink, and we need to choose macro enabled here. Save. So now let's start the macro in the VBA editor. Let's come to Developer, Visual Basic, and insert a module, and I will call this sub unlink table. In here, I'm going to put all the steps I want to go through. I want to update the data, then I want to save the current file, then I want to save the file as workbook without macros. Then I want to unlink the table in that new file, and then I want to save that file. The first three actions will be performed in the current workbook. So here we can say with this workbook meaning the one where we are writing the code, and then here end with. And then the other two actions will be after we save this current file as a new workbook. So with this workbook, let's ident this text here. Having a single quote before the text makes this text a comment, meaning that it won't be perceived by VBA as an instruction to run. With this workbook, update data, we can do that with refresh all. This will refresh all the queries and all the pivot tables in your workbook. If you just want to refresh a particular query, then the code would have to be different. Then we want to save the current file. And then we want to save this file as a new workbook. Let's put this bigger. We would go save as, then the file name. We need to provide the complete path to the file name, including up to the folder and the file name itself and the extension. So I will use the current workbook. So this workbook dot path. This will provide us the current workbook folder, path to the current workbook folder. Then concatenate with backslash, then concatenate with a name for the file. I will use the timestamp for the current time to generate a name for this file. So it will be format, and then now will give us the current timestamp, and I want to write the current time and date in format year 4 digits, month 2 digits, day 2 digits, underscore, and then hours, minutes, and seconds. Okay, so that gives us the file name. And then we also want to indicate the file format, because I don't need the new file to have macros, so we will just save this file as Excel open XML workbook. This will save the current file as a new file. Then the new file will become the active workbook. So these other two actions will be done with the active workbook. So here we will say and with. Let's ident that as well. How do we unlink the table? So the new workbook will be a copy of this one, and will have a sheet named report, and the table is in that sheet. So we will say with active workbook dot sheets, and we can put the name of the sheet here, report, and then in that sheet list objects. So a table is a list objects. And we could either put right here, the name of the table, or just say index 1. So the first table in that sheet, in our case, is just one table, dot unlink. And this will unlink our table from the data source. And then we want to save this workbook. And these are the main steps we want to do. Let's see how this is working. First, very important, let's save this file. Let's save our code. We are in our initial file, and then this file will be converted to a new file without macros. Let's debug. Nothing found for now. Okay, so with our file side by side with the code, let's run it and see how it goes. We press F8 to go through each step. So with this workbook, refresh all, we should see the query updating here. There we go. Then we should see the file being saved there. Okay, was saved. Now we will see this file being saved as a new file with that file format I mentioned. Okay, so let's press F8 again. The current file cannot be saved with the macros because we are asking it to be saved as a just XLSS file format. So we say yes, please go ahead. Okay, then we are done with the current workbook that had the macros, but note that the macros are still available until we close this newly created workbook. So now with the active workbook, we want to unlink this table from the data source. So we should see now these rows loaded replaced with connection only. There we go. Now save the file. It's being saved, and end with, and we're done. Okay, so this is working. Let's see here. In the current folder where we have the file cameras report, PBA, and link, we see that now the file with the current time, date, and timestamp was generated, and it's a Microsoft Excel worksheet. Okay, what else can we do? we saw that alert message asking if we want to proceed without the macros saved in the file. It's a bit of annoying as well. So we can take care of that. And then there will be other issues for us to look into. To add to the code, again, we need to close this file and open the file VBA Unlink where we are building in our code. Okay, we are back. So to avoid that alert message to display, we can add application.display alerts equal false just before we do the save as, but then we must activate the alerts again. So here we will put true right after save as. So let's save. And let's test this again. And I want to make a small change in the data source just to test if the refreshing process is working correctly. This is the data source file, is a CSV file. Let's just make one small change here. This ACFA word I will replace with AAAA. So the first row there in our table should show the next time after we refresh our data AAAA instead of ACFA. Let's close. Let's run the code again. This time I will run it all at once and let's see what happens. Let's click the button here to run. We see that it's trying to refresh the query there, but then it says this will cancel a pending data refresh. Continue. So what's going on now? I've mentioned this on a previous video. What happens is that it is trying to save before the refresh all is complete. You see that it's still trying to refresh all. That's why we get this message saying that if we move on to save, this will cancel the refresh all action that is going on. So let's do cancel. Now we see that the query was not updated. So I'm going to close the file and open again to continue the work from the original VBA Unlink file. So back to Cameras Report VBA Unlink file. Let's do those changes. We need to come here, right-click Properties, and uncheck this option, Enable Background Refresh. The purpose of this property, when unchecked, is to tell Excel that it needs to wait for the queries to be, this query in particular, to be completely updated, to then move on to other actions. I've solved different situations with just doing this, but in my testing for this particular solution, I've noticed that this only was not enough. I've heard people complaining about this not working necessarily all the time. In this case, for this to work, besides us unchecking that box there, we will need to do a few other changes to our code. And one way I could make this work was to put do events after refresh all, after save, and after save as. So after all these actions that can take a few moments to Excel to perform, let's save the file. We are in our VBA Unlink file, and let's test this again. Let's run the code. Click here, updating. The table was unlinked from the query. We see that the table updated correctly here. We see this change that I made previously to our data source, and it saved the file with the new file name that we wanted. Also, we did not get those alert messages, so we are getting there. This is almost done. I'll close this file. Again, the code will not be available in our generated files. Let's just test that. Let's close. the file that we just created is this one here. It's an XLSX file format, and if we come to Visual Basic Editor, we see that this file does not have any VBA code, any macros. Going back to our original file, the only thing that I would add now to this file would be a button to facilitate running this macro. You can, of course, insert a shape and make a very nice button. For now, we are just going to use the buttons we have here under the Developer tab. The macro is Unlink table. Unlink table from source. Let's save. Let's do another change to our data source. Let's put this back to ACFA. And let's run our macro again using the button and checking the final result. Save. So it's saved with the new name. We can see it's an XLSX file. Let's check the Data tab, Queries and Connections. We see the query is available here as requested, but is not linked to the table. So if we try to refresh, the table now is not connected to the query. One final touch to this solution would be to make this button disappear from our final file. We don't need the user to see this button. It may be confusing because the button should not live anywhere, because once we close the file, the macros will not be available again. If we open the file and we try to do this, then we will see that the macro is not available. So one final touch will be going back to the VBA Unlink file. If we go to Home and under Find and Select selection pane, we see that our button is called button 1. Okay, so we could change that name. I'll just use that name for now. And we could either make it invisible or we can just simply delete it, and that's what I will do. So going to the VBA editor again, Alt F11, I will just add one final touch before we save our generated file. So with the active workbook, I'll just paste the code here. In Sheets Report, there's a shape with name button 1. This is how you need to write the reference to that shape, and .delete to remove that button. So let's save this again, this file, and let's run one final test. We see it takes a few seconds to update the query and generate a new file. We have the new name here. The button disappeared. Let's close and pretend we are the receiving user. And the file comes without the button again, and the table will be unlinked from the data source. Okay, so this is a final and complete solution for the request received from Vivek Rain. Thank you for your question again. And now I wanted to share how I usually take care of this situation. Generally, I do not want to send the query along with my data that results from the query or queries in my file. So let's close this file and go back to our original file with the query and before we added the VBA. It was this one. It's very common that we want to send the results to other users to save them separately for some reason. Sometimes we need to export this to serve as sources for other processes. And the way I generally do it is to copy this data, this table, and paste it into a new workbook, but not copy the table itself. If we do that, let's test. If we do new workbook, having this side by side, if I copy my table, select Control C and then Control V, and then in this new workbook, if I go to the Data tab, Queries and Connections, I see that the table brought the query with it. So I don't want that. Undo. If we try to copy the sheet instead, so right click, move or copy to the new book, create a copy. It created a new book, and if we check Data, Queries and Connections, again we see that it brought the query with it. So what I usually do is to copy this table range and then paste the values and the formats into my new workbook. So you can program just that. Start the macro recording and then go through the steps of creating a new workbook and then copying the entire table, including the headers from here. Copy, go to the new workbook and paste as values, and then in the same place paste again the formats, and then save that file as an Excel SX, so just general Excel workbook in the folder you want with the name you want. Since this video is already long, I'm going to just show you the code that I have for that same solution. And this is that one file. If I go to the VBA editor, I can show you the code that I already created here and will be available in the Telegram channel as mentioned at the beginning of the video. So in this case, we define new BK as new book, a workbook, then set the new workbook as workbooks.add, meaning this name will be assigned to a new book that we just create here. Then with this workbook, the one that has the macro, the VBA code, we do a refresh all, do events, save, do events, the same thing as before. And then in the sheet, in sheet reports, the range for the table camera, which is the, let me show you, it's the name of this table that is generated, is given to the table by Excel after the name of the query. So if we go, if you click in the table and click here, we see this is the name of the table. Okay, and this portion here is meant to indicate that we want the table including the headers. Okay, we copy all that, and then with the new workbook that we just created there, we activate that workbook, go to sheet 1, range B2 that I chose to paste my results, do a paste special as values and the paste special for the formats. We disable cut copy mode to eliminate that selection that appears around the cells when we select a range to copy. And then finally save the file the same way as we did before. I am using the same format. By the way, when we don't see the entire code appearing in our window and we want to make it easier to read, anywhere in the line of code that we want to break after a space character, we do underscore enter, and this will allow us to break the code in different lines. I already have another underscore here, so this will work as one line of code only, but is broken in different rows in our text. Okay, so this is our code. I'm going to save and just run one final test. I'm going to delete all these files from here so that we know which one is the new one generated now. So let's click the button. We see a new workbook popping up. at this point the data is being refreshed, and then paste it and save the file here. Let's just do one final test with a change in our data source. Changing this to BBBB. Save and close. Let's close this new workbook. In this case, the previous workbook is kept open because we did not use save as. We are creating a new workbook and then saving it separately. So let's run the macro again. And we see that the query had time to refresh completely. The new data was brought in, and then after that, the data was put in here. This is not a table, it's just a range. If we click here, we see that we do not get the table tab here at the top. We could format it as a table if we wanted to. We just had to create the code for that as well. And so this is what I had to show you today. I hope you liked it. So today was about automating tasks in Excel to eliminate annoyances from our daily routines or work routines. There is a lot that we can learn about Excel and automation in Excel. I hope you choose to subscribe to the channel and keep watching other techniques that I will show in the future. Feel free to also check the past lessons. There's a playlist with tutorials that you can check with other automations there. Like I said before, I'm very interested in your feedback. If this class helped you in any way solving a problem, I would love to hear from you. Type in the comments how this particular class or any other helped you solve one specific problem. This will help other people perceiving the value of this YouTube channel and will help me create more content as well. Have you already clicked like and subscribe? I hope you have. And if you can think of someone who could benefit from watching this video, send them the link. I'm sure they will appreciate that. And let's continue this chain of doing good and help other people doing better work in Excel. Again, thank you for joining me today. Have a lovely day. See you soon.